Very warm welcome to everyone. My name is Monnet. I'm a professor of European law, and today we are here in a Jean Monnet seminar, in a Jean Monnet lecture conducted in our Jean Monnet chair, which is concerned with pluralism in the European Union. Pluralism, in a nutshell, is a normative perspective, is a normative point of view that combines diversity, respect for diversity, and this desire to live with diversities inside a coherent, functional, and viable common goal, which is called the European Union. And it is the object and purpose of this Jean Monnet chair and the Jean Monnet European Academic Forums that we are conducting is not just to talk about the European Union from the Slovenian perspective, but also learn about the European Union from the perspective of other member states. And we've been extremely privileged here because in the diplomatic corps, we have a huge number of great friends of the new university, I can say, very eloquent, very professional, very open-minded ambassadors who have gratefully accepted our invitation to come to the new university and to talk to our students. And as all the ambassadors are like that, but especially today's ambassador is like that. And I'd like to present to you Mr. Juan de Aristegui Laborde, who is the ambassador of the Kingdom of Spain to Slovenia. He is somebody who carries diplomacy in one's genes. One could say. He's a very experienced diplomat, has served both in the Spanish foreign ministry in various positions. He has served abroad in Finland and Turkey, but he's also a great connoisseur of the European Union. Today, before this class, I held a class on the European Union, the institutional side of the European integration. And there is one body which typically works away from citizens' eyes, but it's a very important one. And this is the famous Coreper. Mr. Aristegui Laborde has been a coordinator of the Committee of Permanent Representatives of the European Union. So you're also somebody who knows European Union extremely well. And from my conversations with you, I also learned that you have gotten to know Slovenia really well. So today we are also seizing this opportunity to have the ambassador from Spain, because Spain is currently the country that resides to the Council of Ministers of the European Union. As we know, the member states no longer preside to the EU as such. This is now a role taken by the President of the European Council. But nevertheless, each country, when its presidency terms has its own priorities. We will use this opportunity today to hear as I said, about the Spanish perspective of the European Union, to hear about the Spanish priorities of its presidency, which is also already almost coming to a close. We might already hear about the evaluation of that presidency. Our session today will be conducted, as we're used to, in two parts. First, His Excellency will give a speech to you, and which will also be recorded for our YouTube channel. And in the second part, we will stop recording and we will have a Q&A that you, the students, will have the opportunity to learn from our esteemed guest and to get into a discussion with him. So without further ado, Your Excellency, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's my pleasure to be here in this university of reference in Slovenia, and which also for us diplomats is an extremely useful and interesting institution to discover and to work with. So, as you have said, I will try to divide my presentation into two parts, which in a way of course, are interconnected. One being with the presidency of the council, which Spain holds, and let's say the Euro at the very end of the year, 31st of December, but in practice, until the next European Council of December, that's rather the middle of December. And then I will dwell on a bit what are the views of Spain on the big debate, which is now on the table of reforms of the Union and how the Union should be or look in the future. So if I start with my Spanish presidency reflections, I would like to start by saying that the president of the government, Pedro Sanchez, pointed out in June 15 that Spain was about to assume the presidency with a determined ambition to make it a useful instrument that would improve people. And the motto, Europe Closer, Spanish presidency of the Council is focusing on 4 core priorities. First, reindustrializing Europe and ensuring its open strategic autonomy. Secondly, the green transition and environmental adaptation. Thirdly, greater social and economic justice. And fourthly, strengthening European unity. On reindustrializing Europe and ensuring its open strategic autonomy, this for the presidency is about making the European Union a benchmark in inter alia, production of renewable energy, digital connectivity, advanced robotics, and cutting-edge pharmaceutical products, as well as reducing the EU's vulnerabilities in essential supplies such as food, energy, and health. Work is underway to foster the development of strategic industries and technologies, promoting innovation and a greater integration of the single market. This priority also calls for openness through the expansion and diversification of, on the one hand, trade relations with third countries, and also on the supply chains of the EU. Second priority, green transition and environmental adaptation. This encompasses the fight against climate change, decarbonizing the economy, and preserving biological diversity, one of the Union's biggest assets. Third priority, greater social and economic justice. Spanish presidency is promoting the establishment of minimum standards for businesses' taxation in member states, particularly in the digital sphere. It's also calling for appropriate revision of the 2021-2027 multi-annual financial framework and for a reform of the fiscal rules of the Union. Also to promote a decent work, and to complete the European Health Union. And about the fourth priority, strengthening European unity. Spanish presidency believes that the EU countries should continue to make progress in integration and develop tools that will allow them to face together the challenges of our time. To this end, first and foremost, the Spanish presidency endeavors to maintain the unity between the member states and international partners in support for Ukraine, as much as necessary and as long as it takes. Spanish presidency is also committed to advancing the accession process of candidate countries, completing the Pact on Migration and Asylum, strengthening the area of freedom, security, and justice, as well as promoting democratic values and the rule of law. Stronger and more united union also requires a review of its decision-making procedures. As to the high-level meetings program during the Spanish presidency, on top of the regular October and December European Councils, I would like to mention at heads of the state or head of government level, the informal council of Granada, which took place the 6th of October, plus 3 summits with partners, EU Latin America Caribbean in Brussels, held in July, on July 17th and 18th, the European Political Community held in Granada on October 5th, and the EU Western Balkans Summit to be held in Brussels on December 13th. At ministerial level, ministers for foreign affairs, also with partners, I would like to mention the Union for the Mediterranean, Barcelona to be held on November 27th, and EU Western Balkans, which was held in November 13th. Regarding the EU informal ministerial councils, which are also part of the presidency in parallel to the formal councils and which, because of the fact that they are held in the country holding the presidency have to be planned by the presidency. I just wanted to note that during the presidency, 22 of these informal ministerial councils will have been held. As a matter of fact, the last of those will be held this week in November. I would like to be a bit more specific about some of the priority files identified by the Spanish presidency. We must take into account that Spain took over from Sweden the EU Council presidency at a decisive moment in the EU calendar, since the next elections of the European Parliament will take place in June. This meaning that it will be the last presidency of this institutional cycle that will enjoy, let's say, fully operational Commission and Parliament. This is particularly relevant, as you can imagine, for all those files that will be adopted by the ordinary legislative procedure, also known by its traditional co-decision procedure name. So let me just dwell on a bit on these priorities, which Spain believes are particularly important and on which we have already achieved tangible results. Others are still, work still underway. So first of all, just to mention one which has an institutional implication. During our presidency, agreement was reached by the Parliament and the Council on a new composition of the European Parliament. That will be the composition of the next term of the Parliament, and according to which, by the way, Slovenia has gained one member in the Parliament. It is moving from 8 to 9 members of Parliament. I already mentioned the relevance of the mid-term revision of the multi-annual financial framework 2021-2027. The current multi-annual financial framework is under extreme pressure due to the multiple crises the EU is facing, in particular the crisis in Ukraine and the repercussions it has generated. The President is committed to collaborating with the Commission in the search for consensus among member states and with the Parliament, of course, to reach an agreement before the end of the semester, including, as one of its main components, we hope, the facility for the support and reconstruction of Ukraine. Spanish presidency keeps working towards reaching an agreement on the new economic governance of the Union, which we believe should be adopted and in place before the end of the year. This review cannot be delayed any longer. The worst case scenario being that the current rules kick in again in 2024. The EU needs adapted rules that manage to contain public debt and bring it back to sustainable levels, whilst making possible substantial levels of investment required by the green and digital transitions, as well as other structural shifts the Union needs to carry out. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. The EU needs to keep up the pressure through sanctions. Accountability is a priority in this regard. Ukraine belongs to the European family, and the recognition of its candidate status was a historic step for Europe. Next month, the European Council will discuss the start of accession talks with Ukraine, but also with other candidate member states, candidate countries, excuse me. The presidency attaches also utmost importance to the enlargement and is committed to making progress in this key EU policy. On the basis of merits of the candidate countries, the presidency strongly supports the accession process of the Western Balkans and looks forward to convening international governmental conferences. Southern neighborhood and the Mediterranean, the presidency aims at relaunching the ties between the EU and the Southern neighborhood partners, encouraging regular inclusion in the EU agenda and the implementation of the new agenda for the Mediterranean and the economic investment and investment plan. As to relation with Latin America and the Caribbean, the summit held at the beginning of the presidency was one of its highlights. And on this occasion, agreement was reached to advance in trade agreements with Chile, Mexico, and Mercosur, increase investment, and set up a structured and regular political dialogue at the highest level. Presidency also aims at reaching a final agreement on the 3 pending legislative files of the internal dimension of the Asylum and Migration Pact. On the external dimension of the pact, the EU should make further progress in a preventive policy through investment and cooperation with countries of origin and transit. Spanish presidency sees the reform of the Schengen Border Code as key tool to ensure free movement of persons. It believes that internal controls cannot be neither the rule nor the solution to cope with irregular migration. As to the enlargement of Schengen, the presidency fully supports and looks forward for a quick and very early, imminent, if possible, accession of Bulgaria and Romania. And finally, to conclude on the presidency and its priorities, the reform of the electricity market design is another of these priorities. The aim in this case is to advance the EU's energy sovereignty, economic competitiveness, and combat the climate crisis and high energy prices. It will place at the core of EU policy the protection of consumers and the industry. The adoption of the Gas and Hydrogen Directive is also a matter of priority for the Spanish presidency. So at this point, allow me to then move on to the second block of my presentation. This being, of course, Spanish views and reflections on the future of Europe, or what Europe we want or we envisage for the future. In this regard, the revitalization of the enlargement debate has accelerated the reflection on the future of the European Union and on the necessary reforms at the internal level. The debate on the reforms within the EU played a central role in the informal General Affairs Council under the Spanish presidency in Murcia, as well as in the informal European Council in Granada. The recognition of undertaking reforms in the EU in parallel with progress in the enlargement process was reflected in the Granada Declaration. Following the debate in the General Affairs Council last week, Spanish presidency is considering the possibility of presenting a roadmap at the European Council in December. The purpose of the roadmap would be to structure the necessary reforms so that the EU is fit for enlargement and that this does not diminish the EU's capacity for action, institutional, policy, and as well budgetary. I shall refer to three strands of possible reforms within the EU: institutional, political and budgetary, and thirdly, gradual integration. As to institutional reforms, so far the Council has been rather unfavorable to opening a formal process of reform of the EU treaties. As a consequence, the debates have paid special attention to the provisions of the treaties that allow a certain flexibility to be introduced in the decision-making process without the need to resort to treaty modification, such as the activation of the passerelle clause of Article 48(7) of the Treaty on the European Union. This allowing, for example, to extend the use of qualified majority to areas such as CFSP and other areas reserved to or for unanimity. This proposal is also central to the report of the Constitutional Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, AFCO, which envisages the call of a convention and which will be debated by the plenary of the Parliament this very week. However, it is a fact that many member states consider that the veto is the best way to guarantee the defense of their interests in the EU. Initiatives such as the Group of Friends for Qualified Majority Voting in CFSP seek precisely to overcome this impasse by exploring the possibility of accompanying the gateway clause with a safety net or emergency brake, whose purpose would be to reinforce the guarantees of the member states regarding the safeguarding of their essential national interests. The debate on institutional reforms also directly affects the composition and functioning of European institutions, with the Commission and Parliament having attracted most attention. In the case of the Commission, the increase in the number of member states will exacerbate the problems of coordination and imbalance and even consistency in the composition and working of the College of Commissioners. The rules of Article 244 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union are very strict and do not allow any member state to have permanent commissioners. The alternative then necessarily involves the reform of the treaties or a greater hierarchy in the functioning of the college. As for the European Parliament, the treaties empower the European Council to set its composition. Although the composition of the EP has already been agreed for the next legislature, the problem that arises is that the entry of new member states would mean a number of MEPs greater than the limit of 751, if the current level of representation is maintained. The solution is either to modify the maximum number of seats, and therefore we go again back to the amendment of the treaties, or to reduce the number of MEPs of each state. The second strand, political and budgetary reforms. One of the main elements of the reflection process on the preparation for EU enlargement is the impact of accession on EU policies, on its budget, and the defense of its fundamental values. Certainly with Ukraine, for example, enlargement could make the Union a world champion in the agricultural sector, but it would also call for an in-depth revision of the objectives and funds of one of the main fundamental policies, the common agricultural policy of the Union. At the same time, the Union is exploring ways to strengthen the existing set of rule of law instruments to ensure their effectiveness when violations of the rule of law occur in the states that are already members of the Union. And thirdly, as I said a few minutes ago, gradual integration. On November, the Commission presented a new growth plan for the Western Balkans, including 6 billion euros in grants and loans to foster economic growth and accelerate economic convergence with the EU. The plan essentially aims at bringing some of the benefits of membership to the region in advance of accession or full integration. The plan puts into practice some of the ideas of gradual integration, offering more funds, partial access to the internal market, and greater technical assistance for reforms in exchange for progress in the fundamentals and greater regional integration. There are more ambitious proposals to give content to gradual integration of candidates, which should be taken into account. But at the same time, one should be prudent and aware of the limits imposed by the necessary integrity of the internal market, the decision-making autonomy of the EU bodies, and the capacity of the candidates to absorb more EU funds. To conclude, I would like just to dwell a bit on what are the Spanish views or main ideas vis-a-vis the reform of the EU in general, and not only related to the imminent, we hope, accession of new member states. Spain has been always in favor of a review of the functioning of the EU since the end of the Conference on the Future of Europe. The president of the government, Pedro Sánchez, spoke some months ago in favor of exploring the possibilities of extending the use of qualified majority to foreign policy, taxation, the multi-year budget, and the mechanism for verifying respect of the rule of law and human rights. Spain has been from the beginning, like Slovenia, part of the group of friends on the qualified majority for CFSP, and has shown interest in exploring additional formulas to safeguard the essential interests of the member states. I would like to add that historically, as a member of the Union, Spain has always advocated or defended the deepening of political integration of the Union, based on the values we share, which are enshrined in Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union. At the same time, also from the very beginning, it has been supportive of enlargement as one of the keys for the unity, peace, and stability of a free and democratic Europe. Therefore, the position of Spain vis-a-vis the reforms needed and the adaptation needed of the Union is that this is indeed a need, and this is a fact. and that although it's quite a challenging, not to say a formidable endeavor, the Union needs and has to embark upon a deep reflection, hopefully also fruitful reflection, that will lead to reform and adaptation in depth. Thank you very much.